Why is this guy doing so well?
That is very scary. Leave that
man. Hello and welcome to the League Bound podcast, where we break down some of the best draft prospects and the rising stars of the NBA. I'm your co-host Brandon, and I'm here with my co-hosts Jake and Brody. How are you guys feeling today?
It is great to be back, finally back in the podcast studio. Obviously last week couldn't get in here, but it's going to be another fun episode. We got a lot of stuff to break down. So let's get into it, Brody.
Yep, excited for this one. Not much more to be said. We got some things cooking up, the potential of a new logo, a bit of a rebrand here. So stay tuned for that, and let's get right into it.
All right. We had some negativity this week, and you know we here at League Bound, we're some negativity headhunters. And first off, we have Donovan Mitchell and Dillon Brooks. We were actually watching this live when this happened. We were in the living room and we just came out. I know me specifically, I was in front of the screen. I dropped everything. But we'll just play the clip and we'll kind of break it down for y'all. See, Brooks goes down. Mitchell was on top of Brooks, but he elbowed Mitchell in the nuts. You can't really see it from this angle. As you can see, the rumble begins.
The coach getting in there on Dillon Brooks was pretty crazy
Dillon
to watch.
Brooks body slammed his own coach, which I think is just the funniest thing.
No, yeah, this was wild. I think Donovan got an ejection there too.
Mm-hmm.
Like halfway through the third quarter, and your all-star that everyone comes to watch gets booted from the game. Yeah.
Cleveland still won this game by a hefty margin, but it's still funny. I think too, just seeing the Grizzlies just become the villain of the league is truly something funny, and I also love it too because I kind of like the rivalry, or I guess the animosity that they're bringing back, and I feel like we haven't had. Oh yeah,
look at Evan Mobley just standing there.
Oh, and then the coach and Brooks just going into the stands.
But there was people on Twitter after this scuffle. They were saying we needed a Grizzlies-Cavs Christmas Day game next year. And I don't think this elevated too much to that yet. And it's not really a rivalry quite yet. But you never know. If this becomes something we usually see between these two teams, we may be seeing something like that.
I think it's just gotten to the point where you just need to see the Grizzlies versus anyone on Christmas because they'll start something.
And, there's something I find super interesting about oh, my God, this fight, the fight there just being wild. But in most cases, a lot of teams become the villain after they start winning a lot and they start winning chips and stuff. And then they just become the villain because they're so good. But really, we've observed that the Grizzlies have become the villain from just talking a lot of smack, fighting a lot of teams, and getting into scuffles like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there was another fight the next day. We're not going to break it down because if you've seen that fight, you've probably seen enough. But the Austin Rivers Mo Bamba fight, benches cleared, things got ugly. That was crazy. Austin Rivers, Mo Bamba, and I think Jalen Suggs were suspended. Jalen Suggs, I think, only got one game suspended, but Rivers and Bamba had multiple. But I'm just loving that all of this is happening. And somebody tweeted on Twitter, it feels like we're back in the 90s again, just from those 2 days alone.
It felt like there was wasn't there a football form tackle in that scuffle that happened?
Yeah.
And then there was 5 ejections. 5 people got ejected from the game, which honestly, I couldn't really see how 5 people would have gotten ejected from that pileup, but I didn't really watch too much.
I think most of it was just from people coming off the benches because the NBA is pretty big on that.
Probably, yeah.
But
I think that's crazy because when they don't come off the bench, there's not that many people to break up any of the fights.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they're hammering that so hard.
Yeah, I think it's all stems from the Malice at the Palace, if y'all know about that, where things just got horrible and into the stands. But the last thing I want to say is that the reason that whole fight started was because Mo Bamba said to Austin Rivers, "This ain't high school no more," after he missed a 3. And if you guys know, Austin Rivers had a crazy high school mixtape. And I just think it's funny that of all things is what started this fight. But
pride, man, it gets to you.
Sometimes you can't. So there comes a point when you just can't let people talk to you a certain way. You just got to be like, hey, me personally, I wouldn't take that. Anyways, another bit of news is that ESPN dropped a new mock draft this week. And I was kind of skimming through, and some things that stood out to me was Thompson brothers, both are top 5. I know that many people have that as kind of a popular opinion, but then guys like Nick Smith, he's missed a lot of time, and I know I was somebody who's still high on him, but I feel like you kind of got to give props to some of the other players that have, showed out, but having him at 6, and I think when he's shown so little is kind of unfair. And then Cam Whitmore is another guy who I'm really high on, but he was only like at 9th. And then I know Jake had some things where he was looking at, and it doesn't make sense. Not just on the ESPN mock draft, but you look at some of these major outlets, like even The Athletic. We were looking at The Ringer last week, and they just had some kind of crazy picks to us. And Tankathon isn't really a major outlet, but their mock draft has some flaws as well. So it's just like, as a fan, I feel like, should we really put so much value into these major outlets mock drafts that, we're going to come back and look at these in a few years and we're going to redraft, and like they're all of these drafts are just going to be so heavily different from before these players got picked. So what's the point of even putting so much time and value into really, honoring these mock drafts as accurate?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, years in advance, we usually go back and like we look at the Tyler Hero draft where he was barely even in the lottery. And now when people do a redraft there, he's like in the top 6, top 5. So mock drafts usually are, in the end, pretty incorrect in terms of valuing the best players first. But I think it does give a good job, or does do good to kind of form conversation and just give us stuff to talk about, because you look at some of these from, like you said, the major media outlets, and I feel like here at League Bound, we usually have a lot of questions to ask them, because some of the order on these mock drafts is crazy.
Yeah, and especially, I think, too, this is a draft class where it's like, after, like, we've talked about this before, but after, like, 1 and 2, it really is just kind of like a toss-up. But I think we're starting to see a little bit more, and I'd say even maybe after the lottery, it's kind of like a little questionable. But it's still, to me, it's just like, I'm starting to realize, too, that, like, a lot of this also, it just really depends on, like, what a team needs at that moment in time. And there's just no way of knowing, too, like, how people really are going to pan out, because things are different from everybody. And, like, I always think about, too, how, like, a lot of these, like, in the NBA, before somebody's typically called a bust, or, like, they're called an all-star or whatever, we go off of multiple seasons. But here, and like sometimes with college prospects, it's like we really only give them a year of like really looking at them in depth, and then we just we go off of what we see and kind of let that determine how they're going to be, which I think it's not a horrible way, but some players, that's not really what's going to work for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to what you're talking about, when Darius Garland came into the league, he played like 5 games in college and really struggled in his rookie year. But then you look at Shaedon Sharpe last year, he didn't even play a single college game, and he comes into the league this year and he's been one of the best rookies in the entire draft class. So there's such little consistency between what actually matters for different players. And unfortunately, as a person that enjoys kind of looking at mock drafts and seeing where everyone's ranked, a lot of the times it is really up to how much the player will put the work in to actually be a good player.
Another thing that I think about, too, is like a guy like James Wiseman, because off of those 3 games, I don't remember how many games he played at Memphis, but the point is it was a very small amount. And, he was pretty much a lock for like that top 3. Some people even had him going, did he go like 2 or 1? I don't remember.
You went number 2.
Yeah, 2. But some people even had him going 1. And it's just like, if he had played more games, how would that have affected his draft stock, It's things like that I always think about.
And we could have been seeing someone like Anthony Edwards on the Warriors right now.
Yeah.
You never know. And that would have been
And he's
insane.
on a tear. He's on a tear. But just
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
oh, you can go.
Okay. So I also want to bring it up. I know we talked about it last podcast, but looking at these mock drafts, I want to bring it up again. And I kind of want to stir up the conversation again. But in the top 5, you mentioned that both the Thompson twins are in there for ESPN's mock draft. And they have them above Branden Miller. And I know you guys have some very strong thoughts about Branden Miller being anywhere but 3. And you guys were even talking about the potential that he might be better than Scoot.
Yeah, I mean, the Thompson twins definitely have their pros as a prospect, but I feel like Branden Miller, he has just shown so much consistency at a higher level of competition in the SEC versus the overtime elite schedule. So it's kind of baffling that somebody thinks that the Thompson twins have shown that much in the overtime elite league where they have both of them over Branden Miller, but I definitely do not agree with that.
I think, too, also for me, the thing with the Thompson brothers, specifically with Amen Thompson, I don't understand why he's necessarily, everybody seems to have him as like a lock at number 3. Like, I get that he's a good athletic and playmaking wing. Like, that's a good trait to have. But for me, too, I also just think, like, I feel like what he's doing at overtime is a little kind of like played up because it's kind of flashy, if that makes sense. And I think if he were doing that in college, it would kind of be different. But I also just think about the archetypes that kind of both of them have. And I don't really see them being guys that are like, you know, franchise superstars. And they're also guys who can't really like shoot that well. And we're seeing now how important it is to be shooters in this league. And they're a guy, they kind of remind me of like Ja Morant, where like if you sag off, like they'll shoot it, but they can't really, you know, create, if that makes sense. And I don't know if they necessarily have the same paint dominance that Ja has. And I feel like, too, we like to say, like, oh, they can just get better at shooting. But you really look at it across history, and, like, if you don't come into the league being able to shoot, like, statistically, you're not going to get that much better. Mm-hmm. So it's just, like, it's just one of those things where I feel like they both have really high floors, but I'm not sure that they're going to get a whole lot better. But that's just me.
And also just thinking back in history, how many times have we seen two brothers, let alone twins, be like both of them be good to elite players? Like the Morris twins in their career, they've been, you know, solid for years now, but no one's really looking at Markieff and Marcus Morris as number 2 options on a championship team or even number 1. I mean, yeah, they're really pretty solid players and they're definitely worth being on a roster and a good team, but to draft somebody like Amen Thompson at number 3 over Branden Miller and kind of hope that he can lead your team to the promised land just historically hasn't really worked out.
Yeah. I feel like they both need complementary pieces to really help them get the most out of them. I feel like they'll be good like second, third options maybe.
Now, I will say, my favorite scenario with them would be Amen Thompson going to the Magic at like 5, let's say, and then maybe Asar goes to the Magic as well at 11, and you can kind of team them up like they have been pretty much their whole life. And, you know, maybe them going through this process together will be impactful for their development, just so that they have somebody that's like, they're your blood. They know day in and day out what you're going through. And I think that could be a really good support system for them, especially if they're struggling in their rookie year.
So you'd like to see them play together?
I would. I think that would be fun. We never got to see LaMelo and Lonzo play together in the NBA level so far. I don't think we saw the Morris twins play on the same team in the NBA.
I think they were on the Suns for a bit, but it was when they were a lot younger.
So it would be really fun to see kind of this modern era brother duo kind of take the court together.
And one last thing, how do you guys really, I mean, you got a 6'8", 200-pound borderline, well, I wouldn't say linebacker build, but Branden Miller is a big forward, and he shoots the lights out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how crucial is that to the NBA these days, especially with, like you guys said, the Thompson twins might need to get their shooting game up.
I feel like just look at I look at the potential of the Thompson brothers, and I look at the potential of Brandon Miller. And if Brandon Miller, say he reaches the full potential that people say he has, that's more of a player that could be kind of closer to a finals MVP type of player than I'd say maybe the Thompson brothers are. That might be a hot take. I don't really know, but that's just my thought process and how I view it.
I think the Thompsons remind me a lot of Jalen Green because they're not elite shooters yet, but they're not going to shy away from taking them, and they still rely on that lankiness and athleticism when they're going to the rim, which is something that Jalen Green does. And I feel like Brandon Miller is more similar to the jump shooting scorers like Michael Porter Jr. or even Kevin Durant at times. So it's really just what you value. Do you value that 3-4 that can shoot, or do you value kind of a tweener point guard, shooting guard that can get to the rim? I feel like Brandon Miller's archetype has already been proven to be a winning one, and so far we'll have to see if the Thompson twins can elevate what their archetype is.
And now we've got two players who have really stood out recently, not just this week, but just kind of throughout the season. They've slowly made improvements. But first we're going to talk about Walker Kessler, who for the Raptors, he had 17 points, 14 rebounds, and 7 blocks. For a rookie, I don't care how tall you are. That is insane to have 7 blocks in a game. And he's kind of been a nice piece alongside the Jazz. And I know he was a player who people didn't think he was going to get a whole lot of minutes at first, but he's obviously showing that, he's an efficient player, not just offensively, but defensively as well. And I think the Jazz, I think he's going to be a part of their long-term plans just because of what he's showing so young.
Yeah, that game against the Raptors kind of showed that he's not afraid to get in there as a young player and mix it up at the rim. And in his first year at North Carolina, he was one of the top tier people in their recruiting class, and he had a little bit of a kind of a slow freshman year for the Tar Heels, but then moving over to Auburn and playing alongside Jabari Smith, I think he was able to focus a lot more on the defensive side of the ball. And like we're seeing now in the league, that is something that he is really excelling at. And for a guy that's not really the top offensive option, obviously on the Jazz with Markkanen and Jordan Clarkson and Malik Beasley and now even Colin Sexton, I feel like the role of kind of like a Steven Adams type of center is going to be perfect for them going forward.
And then we also have Cam Thomas, who the second year out of LSU, I remember back when he was in college, he was the leading scorer of the SEC, averaged 20 points a game. Mm-hmm. And I remember, I think even Jake talked about it on a podcast episode last year, just how he was surprised how low he went, and he's showing that, he can be a killer. He had 44 points in that win versus Washington, 16 of 23 shooting, had 4 threes. He's just a guy who is really fun to watch. And I think now if Kyrie's about to get traded, we don't know what they're going to get back for Kyrie, but if Cam can step kind of into maybe a starter role or that 6-man position, that could be really good for his development.
Yeah, I was a little surprised so far in his career. I know the Nets are a veteran-led team, especially when they had Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, so they weren't really trying to wait on a young player like Cam Thomas to develop and become comfortable out there. But, I mean, he's done this in the past. He's had a couple of games. I think he, even last year, had a 40-point game as well. I think he was in the starting lineup for that one due to injury, but this 44-point game against Washington was, I think it said it was the 3rd youngest player to do it off the bench in NBA history. So that just really goes to show that Cam Thomas is a tough shot maker. He is not afraid to put some shots up. I mean, 23 shots off the bench is pretty crazy, but when you're hitting 16 of them, I'm sure Coach Vaughn was saying, "Hey, you got the green light. Go keep putting those shots up."
I always think of that interview where somebody asked him why he never smiles, and he was like, "Ain't nothing funny." Well, yeah. I'm sure he was laughing and giggling after that performance. Pause.
All right, and then moving on to some of the stuff we saw in college basketball this week. The Purdue Boilermakers, they went down for just the second time this year. The number one team in the country, they took the loss to the Indiana Hoosiers. And Brandon, Trace Jackson Davis, 25 points, 5 blocks. Jalen Hood-Schifino, 16 points, and also kind of that game-winning finish at the rim. The Hoosiers, you have to imagine they're going to be rising up the rankings this week. So how do you feel about, first, Jalen Hood-Schifino? Because he has, in my opinion, been kind of being slept on in the draft.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in the Big Ten talk about Jet Howard and him being one of the better freshmen, but I think Hood-Schifino is right there. I know we talked about him earlier in the year, but I feel like Hood-Schifino is a guy, like you said, who's kind of underrated. But I think also, too, I think just looking at him, he's probably one of the better shot creators in this draft class, I feel like. Just because of the way he changes his speed and like the way he can stop and go, I think that's a skill that's really valued in the NBA. And he might not be the most efficient shooter all the time, but like he's a guy who he can be a good second or third option, or even a guy who comes off the bench and, you know, gives you a lot of helpful minutes. And I think too, he's going to be a guy who gets into the league, and we're going to be talking about him in a year, or maybe even a few years, and we're like, yeah, this is a guy who we thought was kind of slept on a bit, and we're showing you why. So,
yeah, he's got a pretty big range in terms of mock drafts. I know we talked about it earlier, how a lot of these mock drafts tend to be incorrect, but he's currently not on the Tankathon mock draft. A recent Yahoo one had him at number 30, and then the ESPN mock had him at 20. So pretty big range going from 20 to not even drafted right now. It might just be that Tankathon's not updated enough, but I feel like Jalen Hood-Schifino to me this year, it's kind of like the Andrew Nembhard of last year's draft, where he had a lot of solid games in college, seemed like a pretty, consistent point guard, and then he kind of just slides in the draft. And with Andrew Nembhard ending up in Indiana, he's been a pretty solid rookie for them at times. That game winner against the Lakers still sticks out in my mind as one of the best plays of the year, but I don't think Jalen Hood-Schifino will slide that much just because he is a young player and a freshman and a lot bigger of a point guard. I think he's like 6'6" or 6'7".
well, yeah,
he's really strong too. So he's going to hold up at the higher level. And I feel like he needs to get a lot more looks because he can hit threes, he can play make, he's strong enough to get to the rim. There's really not too many weaknesses that Jalen Hood-Schifino has.
Yeah, one thing I do want to talk about is, even though we're saying he's a little bit slept on, I think I'm a person who kind of wants him to kind of fall a little bit, just because I want to see him kind of play with some younger guys that can help him develop a little bit more. And he's a guy who shoots more mid-range and like gets to the paint more than he does like actually shoot threes, I feel like. So if he's a player, where he can, play alongside some veterans who can help him kind of, because when you're a player who plays in the mid-range and the paint, you have to be smarter, if that makes sense. Like, you have to find ways to, craft through defenses or get behind center so you can get to the rim and finish. And I think Hood-Schifino, he would do good with like having, like, say he went to the Heat or, somebody, and he played with a point guard veteran like Kyle Lowry. I think that would be really good for his development. And I feel like he's a player who should just be on a good team because...
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because I was actually about to go there. I mean, the highest we're seeing him go is about 20 right now. And I'm looking at teams like Phoenix Suns at number 20, the Clippers at 21, Miami Heat at 22. Those three teams, very, competitive teams looking to make that last piece to jump to the next level and be championship contenders. I feel like you match up Hood-Schifino with Devin Booker in the backcourt would be a very nice mix. And then, same kind of thing with the Clippers and Heat. You got a lot of veteran players that need just that consistent point guard that can get the job done. And I think Jalen Hood-Schifino is that guy. And then lastly, for some of the interesting college basketball stuff for this week, we had the Duke and North Carolina rivalry game just yesterday. And Dereck Lively, a guy that came into this season as one of the most highly touted freshmen in the country, he had a little bit of a slow start to the season, but as of late, he has been picking his game up. He didn't score too much yesterday, but he had 8 blocks against the Tar Heels, and the guy just knew his role last night. And I think that scouts are going to love that about him, that way that he can fill multiple different roles and not just be that kind of big man scorer like an Anthony Davis type. What do you think?
I liked what Dereck Lively showed yesterday too. He's a player who I feel like is just going to be strictly defense, but that's not always a bad thing. And I like seeing players, who just, like you said, know their role and they do it happily. And he's a player who's right now averaging, I think, like 9 points, which isn't necessarily bad, but it isn't great. But I think a player like him, he's going to go into the league and he knows that's what he's going to do best. And I'd love to see him become kind of like a mini Jared Allen, a guy who's just a absolute paint beast and paint protector. But he's also a guy who I feel like can, be out on the perimeter and hold his own. So I'm kind of excited to see what Lively can do if he's on a contending team in the future, and just the presence that he brings to the league.
Yeah, he's fast enough to move and transition pretty well is something that I'm kind of impressed with him by. But we've seen other centers like Robert Williams, who obviously are not anywhere near the top option offensively for their team, but the way that they can just center a defensive system and really just be that defensive cornerstone for a franchise, that has a ton of value. Like, the Celtics don't get anywhere near where they got to last season without the defensive capabilities of Robert Williams. So if Dereck Lively can be somewhat of a version of that for whatever team ends up taking him, I mean, he's going to add tremendous value to whatever franchise it is.
I would also like to correct myself. I was looking at the per 36 minutes. He's actually averaging 4 points. But still, I think that, what he's doing defensively is really good. And if he continues to really just have dominant performances where he's getting like 8 blocks a game, I think it is possible that he could maybe, rise himself back up into that late lottery slot.
I'm looking at kind of this Lakers pick at 14, unless they move it in a deal at the trade deadline, which I'm not sure if they're even eligible to do for this year with the Stepien rule. I don't know if it's going to apply, but I think with how much Anthony Davis's concern is injury-wise and the time that he misses, Dereck Lively could be a pretty good option for them to fill in off the bench. And then when Anthony Davis, if he does go down, I feel like they could shift him up into that role and be nowhere near the offensive player, but at least provide some defensive capabilities that Anthony Davis provides.
Now we will be leading into our prospect breakdown for Gradey Dick, the 19-year-old from Wichita, Kansas, and the freshman for the Kansas Jayhawks, who stands at 6'8", 205 pounds. He's averaging 14.2 points, 5 rebounds, and he's shooting 42% from 3. Jake, what are your thoughts about this guy?
Well, first off, when you're known as a shooter, I like to look at what are your attempts looking like? Are you actually a shooter, or are you just one of these 2-for-3 guys every game? And Gradey Dick is actually a shooter. Over half of his shots this season from the field have come from three-point range, which as a plus 40% three-point shooter on the season, I think that bodes really well for his future in the NBA, because most people don't expect him to be that number 1 or number 2 option on a championship team, but when he gets drafted to a team like, let's say they already have that wing scorer that's their number 1 and then a really good shooter as a point guard, that's where I think Gradey Dick can fit in perfectly, because they can find him on the perimeter when the other guys are drawing so much attention, and he could hit 5 or 6, maybe even 7 threes just off of catch and shoot opportunities like we've seen guys like Duncan Robinson do, Joe Harris. I mean, people are saying that Duncan Robinson contract is the worst in the NBA right now, but when he was given that contract, he was one of the most lethal snipers that there was in the association. So Gradey Dick, if you can perform at this high of a level, there is a lot of money that can be coming your way.
And I think, too, to build off that, where I think he can get his money is the things that he does, just outside of being a three-point shooter. You mentioned Duncan Robinson, J.J. Redick, Kyle Korver. Guys kind of think of him being one of those players. But, he's a dude who can kind of get inside the paint, too. So I think, too, where Dick can really get his money is the fact that he can kind of get his dribble like inside the paint. hit the mid-range shot, but also he has a good floater game, and that's something you don't really see for a guy who's like 6'8", I feel like. And he just kind of has that soft touch, but he also plays with like such good basketball IQ. And I feel like too, he's only averaging like 1.7 assists, but there have been plays where he's made some like pretty smart passes. Like I always think earlier in the season there was a game against Omaha where like he was in the paint, two guys immediately collapsed on him, and the ball was like somebody threw the ball and it was like right over his head, and instead of like just grabbing it and like actually throwing a pass, he just knocked it to the corner. Like it's stuff like that you hardly ever see. But I think too something that's really nice about Gradey Dick is his size and length. He's about 6'8". He's not very girthy, but he's somebody who definitely has the frame to, put on a lot more muscle. And I think if he does that, a lot of people are concerned about his defense, but if he does that, I think Dick will be able to handle the size of a lot of NBA players at the next level.
And kind of like what you said about the assist numbers that aren't really showing up too much in college, I feel like Gradey at this next level is going to get closed out pretty hard a lot of the times. I feel like they're going to close out on him in the corner a lot, and he's just going to have easy passes to make. Like there will just be someone right next to him with their hands ready to shoot. So he won't even really have to worry about, like shooting contested shots, because he's either going to get wide open catch and shoot, or people are going to be flying over there trying to limit what he can do on the perimeter, and he'll just kick it right over to another NBA level shooter and they'll just knock it down. So I feel like it's going to be tough to match up with the team that's got Gradey Dick on the court, just because he is that lethal of a shooter and he's not afraid to do some other things offensively too. He could have caught that lob yesterday, but went right through the hands.
Yeah. But I know I just touched on it a little bit, but I want to say the main thing that does concern me about Dick's lacking ability is that he doesn't really have the fastest feet on defense. And what I mean is like he'll get beat kind of like on, straight line drives, or even he'll get beat a lot of the times on like backdoor cuts. And, I'm thinking specifically of that KU game we had versus K-State, the one we lost. And I remember late in the stretch, it felt like teams just kept, I think it was Marquise Noel for K-State, but he literally just, it was pretty much isoing Gradey Dick the whole time. And Gradey, he would get beat, but I feel like he's a player who Dick needs to learn how to use his length a little bit more. And I feel like he would get to a point where he would just kind of like foul or like, and then he ended up fouling out of the game. But it's like, if he's a player who learns how to use his size, and like he's got a long wingspan, so he could easily, still alter shots. But I feel like it's a thing where, just kind of have to learn. And I think, like I said before, if he just puts on more strength and muscle, because at the end of the day, defense really is about, holding your ground and not letting people get anywhere, that will help him out a lot too.
Branden, do you think with his shot being almost like a set shot, he doesn't get that much elevation? Do you think that is something that he's going to have to work on? Or do you think, like with how good he's already shooting, do you think they're even going to touch his jump shot at all at the next level?
I think that they might have to work on it a little bit, just because I feel like I remember even Tyler Hero, he was already a good shooter coming into the draft, and I remember his podcast with JJ Redick, he was talking about how he had to change his jumper a little bit too. So he'll probably, create some minor tweaks, but I don't think there's necessarily a whole lot that needs to be done to it, just because like I said, he's tall, and I feel like he kind of already has a high release point. So I don't think there would be too much he'd have to change.
And with him being like 6'7", 6'8", he's already, if a smaller guy is closing out on him, he's already getting that shot over them. But we've seen, near 7-footers like Lauri Markkanen now stepping into that small forward role. So Gradey Dick might struggle a little bit more against those bigger and stronger wings like a Lauri Markkanen or a Patrick Williams type. But I could definitely see, just in a pure matchup of shooter, he's going to hold up just fine.
Yeah, I think Dick's size will let him hold up just fine. Plus two, we're getting to a point where size and versatility, it's like you're seeing it all over the place. And I think too, even in college, I feel like the game in a sense is kind of getting taller, if that makes sense. So I feel like it won't hinder him too much when he gets into the league.
Now the real question is, where does he fit in this draft class? Because we've talked about it a lot on this episode, that looking back in a few years, a lot of these guys are going to be reordered, but where will Gradey Dick land on draft night? What do you think?
That's a good question. I feel like he's probably going to fall to that, 10, anywhere like 10 to like late lottery spot. But I would love to see him. I feel like I would love to see him go to a team like maybe Oklahoma City, honestly. Honestly, even Chicago or Portland, because Chicago, they need more three-point shooters right now. I feel like their game is so heavily mid-range. They probably just need to rebuild, in all honesty. But having a knockdown shooter, that I feel like that would be a good way to kind of rebuild or kind of start off, the change.
Yeah, unfortunately for Chicago, though, they would have to, if they did like Gradey Dick that much, they would have to take him in, I think, the top 4, because their pick in the lottery this year is going to Orlando.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
So what do you think about that Orlando fit? Because that's currently where he's put in on Tankathon at number 11, because they've already got Paulo. They've got a couple other guys that can go to. They might, you never know, they might get a Victor or a Scoot Henderson at the top of this draft. So what do you think? Do you think they should go with him at that second first-round pick?
Honestly, I think I think that would still work out, just because Orlando, they still kind of like to have those tall players, and Gradey Dick obviously is 6'8". So I think his shooting ability, and he's not necessarily the best defensive player, but just having another guy out there who rebounds kind of fits into your identity. I think that would still be a pretty good fit. Plus, who doesn't want a shooter nowadays anyway?
Mm-hmm.
So
even if he's coming off the bench.
Yeah. But maybe even Utah too. I think that could be good. Having him paired up with like a former KU player in Ochai Agbaji, but also Utah, I feel like I don't know what their roster is going to look like after this year, or if they're going to make any moves at the deadline, or how much they're trying to rebuild. But Gradey Dick, if he were alongside somebody like Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, that would just be another shooter that you need to keep track of on the floor.
Yeah, the Jazz have 13 and 16, so they're going to have a couple chances to reach on some of these guys that maybe have potential but didn't have quite as good of a season as some of these other top-tier picks. So they have a good chance. They've been one of the more overachieving teams this year, I think we can say. Going into the year, people really thought they were the lock for the worst team in the league. And now they're looking like one of the more up-and-coming teams. And if they can hit on both of these picks, if Gradey Dick is one of those guys, the Jazz may be right back into playoff contention.
All right, I got a question for you guys. And I think I asked this pretty often, but it especially pertains to the Kansas Jayhawks as kind of what happened last year, in that let's say Gradey Dick and the Jayhawks go deep in March Madness, and let's say he excels in his game, he's going crazy. Could you guys see him going higher than he's currently at? And like, to what degree?
If he went on like a absolutely insane run where he's putting up like 20 points every game, on efficient numbers, I could see him, jumping up. But I think too, also, I feel like just from what I've looked at in scouting reports, and like even what I've seen, I feel like people are just so kind of convinced on his defense that, unless he showed out defensively and had insane performances, but I don't feel like it's going to change that much. But I feel like for the most part, he'll probably stay where he's at, even if he does have a really outstanding performance. Plus also too, I think with KU, they have Jalen Wilson, he's a projected second rounder right now. But I feel like realistically, he's just going to have bigger performances than he will. So I think that's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, Jalen Wilson will definitely be their number one option. In a close game, they're going to go to Jalen Wilson for the shot to win it all. They're not probably going to draw anything up for Gradey Dick unless they're down by 3. And even with that, Jalen Wilson is still a decent enough three-point shooter where they'll probably draw it up for him as the veteran of the team. But when you compare him to Jet Howard, who's kind of in that same range as Gradey Dick right now, if Michigan can't really get anything going in the tournament and Kansas pushes maybe to the Elite Eight or farther, we could definitely see Gradey kind of rise to maybe that top 10 range. It's really tough because, like we've been talking about for weeks now, this draft class is really good at the top. Even through like probably the top 8 to 10 picks, I think are going to be very good players at minimum. So for Gradey Dick to push up through there, probably going to have to see guys like maybe Cam Whitmore for Villanova kind of struggle. You might want to see Cason Wallace, Kentucky, maybe not even make the tournament, which kind of sounds crazy at this point in the year. But basically, in all, Gradey Dick's going to have to blow up if he wants to get that high.
That is a good point, though, you made about how I feel like when we get asked these questions, I always think about just that one player. But you do have to think about there's other people in this draft who are also doing, great things. And even looking at like years past too, like I don't think if Jabari went out in the first, or not, they didn't go out in the first round, I don't think. But whenever Auburn went out, I don't think if they had made a deep run, I still don't think that Paulo would have gone first, more than likely. But, it really is just a situational thing. It's like, how did this dude pan out? It's just a comparison game. Overall, Gradey Dick is a prospect that I'm really excited about. And not only is he a KU player, but I think he's a player who will be a phenomenal shooter at the next level. Maybe even in a few years, we'll see him among the league leaders in three-point percentage. But this is a guy I'm excited to see pan out. And Gradey Dick, I believe in you.
All right, gentlemen, it is time to finally bring back trivia. I got 3 questions for you guys. You know the drill. 3 questions. I'd say a relatively unique draft, or not draft, trivia compared to like what I've done before. But yeah, let's get right into it. So, the first question for you guys. I mean, I feel like we'll see how quickly people, or you guys will name this off first, but who invented basketball and where was he from?
James Naismith, and he was from Canada. But he lived he moved to Kansas for a bit.
Okay.
I knew it was Naismith. I did not know Canada, so...
He was from Canada. That's what I wanted to stump you guys on, but this guy's a KU fan. I kind of handed him a freebie, I'm not going to lie, but...
Be like that.
All right. Now. This question will be interesting. I don't think I've ever done something like this with you guys, but the 1984 NBA draft is considered one of, if not the greatest draft class of all time. I want you to take turns naming off draft picks from this class until someone fails. You guys can like rock, paper, scissors or something to figure out who goes first.
Dude,
I'll be generous. I'll let you go
Dude,
first.
I don't know. Like, can you just give us like the first, like who's the team at least from the first pick? Because I don't know my years.
Okay.
Like
The first pick?
the first, like the
The
team
first team to pick was Houston.
Okay, so that is the Hakeem draft, I'm assuming then.
Well, do you want to start?
Hakeem Olajuwon, yes.
Okay, well, he just started. He said Hakeem. Who do you got in that draft?
I have to... Oh, I thought we were just... Okay.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, obviously.
Okay.
No.
He was
Yes.
third.
He was the third pick in 1984.
Don't we have to go 1 through...
No. It's just anyone in the draft. Name someone in the draft.
Okay, I thought we were going...
Sorry.
If
No,
you
we don't need to do the
If
order.
you need the second, Sam Bowie.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was like waiting on.
Dang. Well, you just wasted a turn.
Oh, damn. To be like that.
All right, so we
God.
have Hakeem Olajuwon, Sam Bowie, and Michael Jordan. There's a couple more relevant people in here.
I was going to use the Sam Bowie one, but I don't know, man. I'm not a historian. I'm very bad at this. I'm a casual. You can flame me. I'm going to just say James Worthy, but I think he's too old. I think he was like
don't think
before
so
Michael.
Isn't
Nope. Do you want to? Jake got that wrong. So already out the gate, the first 3 picks. I was wondering if you guys would be able to list it or
I
not.
low-key
I don't
cheated
remember.
though because I went ahead and just named.
Well, you
2.
kind of screwed yourself over there. But do you guys want to know some of the other relevant guys in this?
Isn't
or do you,
Malone in there? Or am I tripping?
I don't think Malone's in here.
Because Barkley.
Yeah, so it's Charles Barkley and John Stockton
Oh, that's who I was thinking.
were the other 2 that you guys probably would have known about. I feel like I've heard of Earl Jones before.
Earl Jones.
That or I'm just reading a name I recognize that has nothing to do with the sport. All right.
Jones.
All right, we're let's keep going here.
He might have been on Winning Time. Because, actually, never mind. I'm tripping.
Possibly. Okay. Third and final question. What is it? Man, Brandon already won this. He's 2-0 on this right
But
now.
I cheated.
The historic
cheated.
questions, they always trip me up.
Yep. Well, this one's kind of historic as well. So sorry, Jake. But
It's a rough week.
in 2018, the Suns got the number 1 overall pick in how many years? This was their first time getting it since how many years? I'll give you a hint. It is a lot. It's a long time.
I'm gonna guess.
Can you give us like a ballpark? Like
I'm gonna guess 50.
oh dang.
I'll give you that benchmark there. I already lost, so I already just
feel
throw
like-
anything out there.
I feel like it's less than that, so I'm gonna say like 33.
33. Okay. Well, somehow Jake got it on the money. It is
What?
50 years flat. It was 50 years flat since 2018
Let's go.
that the Suns got a number 1 overall pick. And then they got it, and they took, why is he blanking? DeAndre Ayton. They took DeAndre Ayton. He got a massive contract, and yeah,
You
we'll see
wanted it
how
in
the
Indiana.
Suns. We'll see how the Suns do.
All right. Well, it's a pretty rare occurrence that I go down 2-1 in trivia,
It's about to become more often.
but I think that's gonna do it on this edition of League Bound. Make sure you guys keep it locked on the channel and make sure you follow us on social media. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Jacob Schrantz.
You can follow me on Instagram at Branden.blue and on Twitter at Branden_blue25.
And you can follow me at Broderick Wilken on Twitter and at Broderick Wilken on Instagram. You can follow League Bound on YouTube and Spotify under just League Bound. You'll find us pretty easily there. And on Twitter, you can do _LeagueBound_ to find us there. That's pretty much it. Like, subscribe, watch some more of our content if you enjoyed it. We really appreciate all of our listeners who go through our entire podcast and just like enjoy the trip with us. And you know, we got better content coming on the way because we're improving every single podcast. So
Yeah. And if you're listening this late, what do you think of the new logo? Is it W or an L? I think on the footage it is reversed for some reason.
I will flip it.
But yeah, we can flip it. We can put it up on the screen. Give us your thoughts. Still workshopping, but we think we're getting pretty close to the final product.
Have a good one.
Hope you guys enjoyed our dick breakdown.
For real.